Today I want to talk about the Xinjiang Uyghur re-education camp or Japanese American internment camp. Which one is concentration camp? I don't know how many people know about the during the World War II, 120,000 Japanese Americans were rounded up, being sent to actually exile to like really remote area, and they were put in some internment camp surrounded by wire fence. That's actually barbed wire fence. Their properties basically were confiscated. They were given like maybe 2 or 3 days to liquidate all their assets. They can only bring a suitcase with them, and then every Japanese Americans, American-born Japanese or Japanese people with permanent residency in the United States, even those with 1/6 of Japanese, still considered as Japanese group, and they were all rounded up, and they were jailed basically for I think several years, and many of them was put in more like horse stables. They were in the place that smelled like horse shit. So I don't know how many people know about it, but that was the part of American history, actually not even less than 100 years. I think many Japanese Americans actually were born in the horse shed during that time. They are still, many of them are still alive today and give personal testimony to that period of American history. Recently, there's a hot topic of Uyghur Chinese were sent to some re-education camps. There were, I think there are about 12 million Uyghurs living in Xinjiang. I think maybe tens of thousands has been sent to those re-education camps. Some Uyghurs living in exile in foreign countries like those in United States claim up to 3 million Uyghurs were sent to those camps, and they call them concentration camps. I don't know, so far there's no pictures of Uyghurs being tortured and killed in those camps, like those, about 22 Uyghurs were actually tortured, brutally tortured in the Guantanamo Bay prison by American soldiers. I think we probably have seen the pictures, and also there's testimonies, because it was some court document show the kind of testimonies to say how they were tortured by American soldiers. But so far, neither the foreign journalist or any American spies or Western spies or American satellites have seen, provide any picture of Uyghurs being tortured in those camps. Let's just say those camps, we know about 12 million Uyghurs living in Xinjiang area. Even we say the maximum was put in the camp like 3 million by Uyghurs who work for American, like CIA or Homeland Security, claim that up to 3 million Uyghurs. Then we just question why the Chinese government only put 3 million Uyghurs in the camps, not the entire 12 million Uyghurs in the camp. Why they leave about the 75%, 70 to 80% of Uyghurs not being arrested or put in the detention camp. If you call it a detention camp, yeah, okay, we can call them a detention camp because they were not voluntarily enrolled in those places, even you call it re-education camps. We just say, hey, it's true, some Uyghurs were put in the detention camp like the Japanese Americans were put in the detention camps. But when you call them as concentration camps, we remember the concentration camps in Germany that millions of Jews were actually slaughtered, starved to death. So the purpose of those camps were actually to kill them, not to release them after a period of time. But the Japanese Americans in the end most of them were released. And then for the Uyghurs in China, 75% of Uyghurs were never been to any of those camps. So how can you say that there is actually genocide of 3 million Uyghurs and leaving the other 75% of them alive? Now, what was the point? I don't know how many of you actually heard about it. In 2014, there was a 9/11 of China, where a group of Uyghurs carried out long knives and entered a train station in South China. Uyghurs live in northwest of China, but they went to a train station, Kunming Train Station in Southwest China, near Burma or Thailand, and indiscriminately slaughtered, hacked passengers. So about 29 people died on the spot, and then about 100 people were injured. And by some local doctors, actually around 80 people died due to that incident. So, and then a year later, 2 or 3 Uyghurs set up a bomb in Thailand, Bangkok, and killed about 20-some tourists in a Thailand shrine. So let's not forget the facts. The Japanese Americans were interned in America when there was no crime was ever reported to committed by Japanese Americans. They were put in the internment camps only because their race, and the race alone are questioned for their loyalty. If they are born as Japanese American during World War II, that Japan and America went to war against each other, and Japanese Americans were questioned for their loyalty and put in the intern camp and lost their properties. In China, there are China and in the neighboring countries, the Uyghurs commit terrorist attacks, and the Kunming Train Massacre and the Thailand bombing were carried out by Uyghurs. So apparently there's some element in the Uyghur community that they are willing to kill people for whatever their cause. What would to do with them? So apparently there are some extremist views, terrorist activities happening in the Uyghurs community. When they did it in China, the Chinese government have every right to question the loyalty of this group of Uyghurs, the Chinese citizens who are Uyghurs. And for whatever the elements, they are determined, they have a questionable motive. The Chinese put between maybe 1% to say 25% of Uyghurs into the education camps to deradicalize them, to put them through patriotic education, that they have to, if they want to be a Chinese citizen, they have to be identified with this country. Just like every Americans here, that we want to make sure at least every American citizens should be patriotic to America. So it's very reasonable for Chinese to make sure Uyghur Chinese citizens should be patriotic to China. Otherwise, they can just leave China and go immigrate to another country and become a citizen of another country. I don't think China government care about that. But if you still live in China, you should be having your loyalty to your own government. I remember when we become American citizen, we have to pledge loyalty to American government because we live here. This is our home. And for Uyghurs, Chinese, China is their home. And it's if you want to carry out terrorist attack, I think the government has every right to put you into some program to make sure you don't carry out any terrorist act. Just like the January 6th, the Capitol riots. When you try to set up a riot to attack Capitol Hill, you are a special group of people that actually need to go through, put in either a prison or some kind of surveillance, that you will not do harm the people or the country. So I think when we talk about genocide camps, I think the best way to compare whatever the re-education camps in China, we can compare that to the Japanese internment camp, Japanese American internment camp during World War II. Those are all state-sponsored detention camps without due process, without court, ruling of whether or not they're guilty or not. So I think in nature, they are the same. A group of citizens were questioned about their loyalty to their own country. And then the state, you use their power to put these people who they believe has questionable identity and go through a program that maybe violate their human right. But if you are actually thinking or planning or supporter of terrorist attacks and violate the human right of other people, ordinary citizens or the government, do these people still deserve to be left alone? So for those people, question about China's motivation, the Xinjiang detention camps. Just check about the Japanese Americans being interned in America. Why nobody's calling Japanese Americans intern camp as concentration camp, as cultural genocide, or just genocide, itself? Has any Japanese Americans been put in a trial before they were put in the intern camps? All their property has been forcibly liquidated to be actually taken by white Americans. Have you heard any Uyghurs in China that they lost their properties while they were in those detention camps? We don't have to call them, re-education camps or internment camp for the Japanese Americans. We just call them detention camps. Yes, they were all in detention camp. There's any report of those Uyghurs that their family lost their private properties, and then the kids and the adults are put in those camps. Why there's only adults went through the detention, not the kids? If they want to carry out a genocide, why leave the kids alone? Because during the Japanese internment camps, children and adults were put in the detention camps. They lost all their private properties even after their release. Very few families regain their private properties. And then even by the 1980s, Ronald Reagan signed the executive order to pay reparation to the Japanese American, and admit the government committed mistakes, but all those lives were lost, all those property were lost, and nobody really speak up for them. So I think there was some double standard, and there was also their question remained that the Chinese detention camp was called concentration camps, and then genocide. Why not the 75% of Uyghurs are left alone and live happily out, happy? There's the pictures on the street. The numbers, I can speak volumes. That 75% of Uyghurs never put in the concentration camps, or if you call it, or detention camps, or whatever education camps. And for the past 5 years, there was no more terrorist activities in Xinjiang. Well, I think there are some positive results out of this so-called detention camps for Uyghurs, because there were no more terrorist activities compared to 5 years before they were put in the constant, detention camps. The first time I heard about this detention camp was in 2018, when a friend of mine who lived in Shenzhen near Hong Kong went to travel to Xinjiang, and there local people told her that their family member were sent to some detention camp. We were all shocked to learn that. We couldn't believe it. But looking at this issue with the context of regular terrorist attacks, suicide bombings in Xinjiang for the 10 years prior to that, between for almost 20 years, from the mid to 1990s to 2000, almost 20 years, almost 20 years, there was a constant terrorist attacks. Why all of a sudden there's no more terrorist attacks in the last 5 years after this program of detention camps for certain Uyghurs who were, potential terrorists or terrorist supporters? I think if anybody want to make a judgment of what's happening in Xinjiang to the Uyghurs, just compare the detention camp for the Japanese Americans who has lost their properties, their children born in detention camps, and with the Uyghurs, that none of the Uyghurs has lost their private properties, none of their kids were put in the detention camps. So this is genocide or a concentration camp is just a smear campaign by certain countries, media, for some political gains, to eradicate extremist groups in one country. What other options do you have? I think for Americans, let's say, what is really troubled me for the past 2 weeks was 2 African American drivers were terrorized by white cops for their simple traffic check. One is actually African American soldier were stopped by white cops for having display a temporary plate for his new car, and he was required to get out of his car and then handcuffed and then humiliated like that. Another African American was pulled over because he has some I guess air freshener hanging on the rear view mirror, and for that he was required to get out of his car and then later killed. And I actually one time I ran through 3 stop signs on one street. I got pulled over. The police just checked my driver license and they wrote me a ticket, and I have to pay a fine, and went through some online driver's training. I was never asked to get out of my car and handcuffed and put on the ground, be humiliated or killed. Why African Americans deserve to be treated, to be harassed like that? This is a racism, okay? And African Americans, they don't deserve to be terrorized on a daily basis. I feel sorry for African Americans, and God said we're all born equal, and we need to be treated equally.